What if I told you that your life would transform the moment you stopped trying so hard? Not because you gave up, not because you quit, but because you finally understood that forcing your way through life is the slowest way forward. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss videos like this that challenge how we see the world. And if this video resonates with you, consider hitting the super thanks button below to support the channel and help us create even deeper, more meaningful content. Every bit truly matters. Now, take a deep breath. Let go. Let everything go just for a few minutes. Because today's video is going to invite you into a new way of being. A way that has nothing to do with pushing harder, achieving more, or fixing yourself. Instead, it's about letting go of control and discovering that real power begins when force ends. We live in a world that worships effort. Hustle harder, grind more, sleep less, stay productive, keep moving. And if you're not doing any of that, you're failing, right? Wrong. There's a quiet truth that ancient Taoist wisdom has been whispering for centuries. A truth that Alan Watts, one of the most poetic and profound thinkers of the 20th century, gave voice to in a way few ever could. And that truth is wrapped in two deceptively simple words: Wu Wei. Now, I know it might sound foreign, mystical, even impractical at first, but trust me, Wu Wei isn't about abandoning your responsibilities or drifting through life in a daze. It's about living in alignment with reality rather than in resistance to it. It's not about inaction, it's about unforced action. Think of it like this. Wu Wei is the art of sailing, not rowing. When you sail, you read the wind. You work with it. You raise your sail and let nature do the heavy lifting. When you row, you fight the current. You burn yourself out. You try to conquer something that was never meant to be conquered. So let me ask you, how often are you rowing through your own life? How many hours have you wasted forcing conversations, controlling people, micromanaging outcomes that were never in your control to begin with? How many sleepless nights have you spent trying to think your way into clarity, only to end up more confused? This video is for you. This video is your chance to step out of that cycle and learn what it means to move with the current, not against it. You're going to learn why forcing is the enemy of flow, why over-efforting keeps you stuck, and how living one single day in the spirit of Wu Wei can change how you relate to your mind, your emotions, your work, and your relationships. You'll hear stories of people who let go of their grip and found themselves in a place they never imagined possible. You'll see how children understand something that adults have forgotten. You'll understand why space isn't empty, but full of possibility. And most of all, you'll learn what Alan Watts really meant when he said, Wu Wei is the art of sailing, not rowing. So grab a cup of tea, find a quiet place, and join me on a journey into one of the most powerful philosophical insights you'll ever encounter, not as an idea, but as a way of living. And hey, if this message resonates with you at any point, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to support future content, and leave a comment below sharing how this concept lands for you. I read every single one. And if you'd like to say a special thanks for this content, there's a super thanks button right below this video. Your support allows me to create videos like this slower, deeper, towa. Let's begin. When Alan Watts speaks of Wu Wei, the Taoist principle that roughly translates to non-forcing, he's not inviting people to give up or become passive. He's introducing a radically different way of engaging with life, one that feels counterintuitive in modern society, yet deeply liberating. What he's proposing is not to withdraw from effort altogether, but to understand the rhythm of life so intimately that our actions align with it rather than push against it. This philosophy, though ancient, feels particularly relevant in a culture obsessed with productivity, where burnout is worn like a badge of honor and rest is often mistaken for laziness. In everyday life, the difference between forcing something and flowing with it is visceral. You can feel it in your body. Consider trying to fix a computer bug at 2 a.m. You're tired, irritable, eyes burning, and the more you try to force a solution, the more tangled everything becomes. Then you sleep, wake up, and solve it in 5 minutes. That's the essence of Wu Wei. It's not about abandoning the goal, but trusting that the solution often comes through allowing, not pushing. What's used is the example of a martial art like judo, where you don't resist your opponent's force, but instead use it against them. You don't apply strength randomly. You wait until the other person is off balance, then respond with just enough effort to move them. There's no resistance, no overexertion. The action is perfectly timed, minimal, and effective. In modern terms, think of a master jazz musician improvising a solo. They're not following a rigid script. They're deeply attuned to the flow of the music and respond intuitively. That's Wu Wei. That's the art of sailing. What's mentioned's riding the wind, not rowing against it. A common misunderstanding is to equate Wu Wei with laziness or indifference. But what's clarified is that Wu Wei is not the same as an action. There is action, but it arises naturally, without inner resistance. He brings up Shakespeare's line, "There's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood, leads on a fortune." This line beautifully illustrates the idea of timing, of catching the wave rather than trying to create one from scratch. It's not passivity, it's precision. This perspective challenges the Western idea of willpower and control. From a young age, we are taught that success comes from trying harder, pushing more, setting goals, and forcing ourselves to achieve them at all costs. Hustle culture, productivity hacks, morning routines that stretch from 5 a.m. until bedtime, all of this reinforces the notion that control equals success. But how often does that really work? And at what cost? Think of the moments in your life when things felt effortless. Maybe it was a conversation that flowed without awkwardness, a day at work where you were in the zone, or a time when an opportunity landed in your lap, just when you stopped chasing. These moments weren't void of action, they were full of aligned, natural action. You didn't force them, you allowed them, and they felt right. What's critiques? Those who claim to embrace spontaneity, but are still trapped in reaction. For example, some individuals believe they're living freely by rebelling against societal norms, doing the opposite of what's expected. But this too is a form of control. It's not genuine freedom. It's still playing by the rules, only in reverse. A person who decides to dress in outlandish clothes just to shock people, or someone who avoids traditional careers just to be different, isn't necessarily being spontaneous. They're being reactive. True Wu Wei isn't about opposing structure. It's about transcending the need to react altogether. To live this way, Watts says, you must quiet the mind, not in a dramatic, mystical way, but in a simple, practical way. Let the noise fade so you can hear the subtle cues of your inner voice. It's in that silence that we discover what we actually want, not what we think we should want. In a world full of noise, notifications, opinions, and expectations, silence has become a rare and radical act. But it's the foundation of Wu Wei. Without it, we act from conditioning, not clarity. He makes an interesting point about how children inherently understand this. Kids don't need to be taught how to wonder. They already know. They ask questions not because they expect answers, but because they're fascinated by the mystery. What's beyond the stars? What did God do before the world began? Adults often laugh these off as silly, but they're not. They're profound. Children spin in circles until the world tilts, make faces in the mirror, play with nonsense sounds. They know instinctively that life is weird, and they love it. As we grow up, we're taught to ignore that weirdness. We're told to label things, define them, categorize them. This is blue. That is red. This is male. That is female. What says, check all that at the door. Not because it's wrong, but because it limits you from seeing what is. For just a moment, what if red wasn't red? What if nothing had a name? What would the world look like then? It's not about rejecting knowledge. It's about remembering what exists beneath it. This idea isn't anti-intellectual. It's not about undermining reason or science. On the contrary, it's about suspending those tools temporarily to access something deeper. Once you've reconnected with that sense of unfiltered presence, you can bring your intellect back in, refreshed, reoriented. Logic and reason are valuable, but they're not the only lenses through which to view reality. There's a compelling metaphor here for relationships. Forcing closeness never works. Try and make someone love you. Pushing conversations, demanding connection, these things usually backfire. But when you give space, let things breathe, and show up authentically without expectation, intimacy often grows. Wu Wei in relationships is about being open, available, and present, not needy or manipulative. It's allowing love rather than chasing it. The same principle applies to creativity. Many writers describe the struggle of writer's block as trying to force words onto a page. But when they step away, let go, do something unrelated, the ideas come. A musician trying to write the perfect song under pressure may feel stuck, but when they play for joy, without agenda, inspiration returns. This is not magic. It's neuropsychological. The default mode network of the brain active during rest connects ideas in the background. In other words, your brain solves problems better when you stop forcing it to. Even in leadership, Wu Wei has relevance. The best leaders often act from deep awareness rather than sheer effort. They listen more than they speak. They adapt rather than control. Think of someone like Satya Nadella at Microsoft. He didn't charge in with grand pronouncements. He observed, understood the culture, then guided it with humility. His leadership style feels more like sailing than rowing, and it's worked. Under his watch, Microsoft not only grew, but regained relevance. At its core, Wu Wei is about alignment. With nature, with timing, with self. It doesn't mean absence of action, it means intelligent action. It's knowing when to move and when to wait. It's being sensitive to the natural unfolding of things and acting accordingly. Alan Watts invites us to consider that trying too hard often gets in the way of our own lives. We make plans, build expectations attached to outcomes, and yet, the moments of deepest joy, creativity, and connection often come when we let go, when we trust the process, when we stop forcing. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals or work hard. It means the quality of your effort matters. Forced effort pushed through tension, resistance, or fear feels heavy and often yields poor results. Inspired effort arising from clarity, presence, and alignment feels lighter, more fluid, and often more effective. Wu Wei is not a technique. It's a shift in posture toward life, a release of grasping, a return to trust. It reminds us that we're part of something larger, a current we can ride rather than resist. It's ancient wisdom, yes, but also a practical guide for modern living. You don't have to become a monk or a philosopher to live this way. You just have to notice when you're rowing and ask yourself, could I be sailing instead? The concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, is one of the most misunderstood yet profoundly insightful teachings in Taoist philosophy. On the surface, it seems paradoxical. How can not acting be a form of action? But Alan Watts, in his trademark style, shows us that Wu Wei isn't about sitting back in laziness or apathy. It's about a different kind of engagement with the world, one that's rooted in harmony rather than control, awareness rather than aggression, and flow rather than force. To understand Wu Wei is to shift your relationship with effort itself. In English, Wu Wei is usually defined as effortless action or non-forcing. But even these definitions are incomplete unless we dive deeper. Think of it not as absence of doing, but as doing that emerges naturally without resistance. It's like water flowing around a rock. It doesn't stop. It doesn't push. It simply finds the path of least resistance and moves forward. That's the spirit of Wu Wei. The action is still there, but it arises from alignment with reality, not from fighting it. Wu Wei is not synonymous with laissez-faire, though the two may appear similar at a glance. Laissez-faire, often used in economic or political contexts, implies a kind of hands-off attitude, letting things happen with no intervention. Wu Wei is more nuanced. It isn't detachment or disinterest. Instead, it is a deep attentiveness to the natural rhythm of things and the wisdom to act only when the moment calls for it. It's not about refusing to participate, it's about participating with precision. Similarly, Wu Wei isn't quite the same as spontaneity either. Spontaneity suggests impulse, doing something on a whim. Wu Wei is deeper than that. It arises not from impulse, but from clarity. It's spontaneous, but not chaotic. It's instinctive, but not random. And it is never self-conscious. The moment you try to be spontaneous, you're no longer being spontaneous. Wu Wei only emerges when the ego steps aside and allows the action to be what it wants to be. Let's take a simple, relatable example. Imagine you're dancing. There's music, you're moving, and it feels good. You're not thinking about what move comes next. You're just flowing. That's Wu Wei. Now, imagine you start thinking, what should I do with my arms? Or, how do I look right now? Suddenly, you're out of the moment. The flow is broken. The action becomes stiff, calculated. That's the opposite of Wu Wei. And we've all been there in conversations, creative projects, job interviews, those moments where overthinking cuts off our natural rhythm. Alan Watts talks about this in artistic performance. When we watch a musician or an actor, we can sense immediately whether their performance is forced or flowing. Forced performances feel artificial. They don't ring true. The audience feels uncomfortable, even if they can't explain why. But when the performance is natural, effortless, alive, people are moved. That's Wu Wei in action. It's not about not working hard. The artist has trained for years. But in the moment, they let go and allow the music or the character to come through them. The technique supports the spontaneity rather than controlling it. This also shows up in sports. Watch a great basketball player like Stephen Curry when he's in the zone. He's not calculating every move in real time. His body knows what to do. The shots, the passes, the footwork, they all flow. The moment he starts overthinking, performance drops. The mind gets in the way of motion. Coaches talk about this all the time. The best athletes have great muscle memory, yes, but they also know how to trust it. That's Wu Wei. Even in martial arts like Aikido or Judo, where the concept of Wu Wei finds one of its most literal expressions, the practitioner doesn't oppose the opponent's force. They use it. They redirect it. There's a time to move, a time to wait. A master doesn't waste energy trying to overpower. They conserve their strength and act only when it matters. This is incredibly difficult for beginners to learn, especially those raised in Western competitive mindsets where more effort equals more success. But as the practitioner matures, they realize that subtlety is power. Wu Wei isn't weakness, it's efficiency, precision, and timing. We see this in business too. Some of the most effective leaders don't micromanage or over-control their teams. Instead, they create the conditions for flow. They know when to intervene and when to step back. Satya Nadella's leadership at Microsoft is a modern example. He didn't come in and restructure everything overnight. He listened, observed, and understood the company's rhythm before making changes. His leadership was responsive, not forceful, and as a result, deeply transformative. In contrast, consider a manager who is constantly issuing orders, setting aggressive deadlines, and watching over every little task. On paper, this may look like leadership, but in reality, it often stifles creativity, burns out employees, and creates a culture of fear. That's what forcing looks like in the workplace. Wu Wei leadership is not about being passive or nice. It's about recognizing that growth and innovation happen not through pressure, but through alignment and trust. Parenting offers another relatable arena. Every parent has had the experience of trying to get a toddler to do something: eat vegetables, go to bed, get in the car. The more you push, the more they resist. But if you approach with patience, if you wait for the right moment, or redirect their attention, the outcome is often better and less stressful for everyone. This doesn't mean you let the child run wild. It means you're responding to reality, not trying to impose your will on it. Wu Wei doesn't mean do nothing. That's a misreading. It means don't do too much. Don't act from resistance. Don't force what isn't ready. In today's world, we're so conditioned to hustle that the idea of waiting feels like weakness. But sometimes, inaction is the wisest choice. Not because you're afraid to move, but because you're wise enough to wait for the right moment. That's the essence of Taoist wisdom. The understanding that life has its own timing, and our job is not to dominate it, but to dance with it. There's also an emotional intelligence embedded in Wu Wei. You can't practice it if you're not in tune with your own state and the energy of the situation. Let's say you're in a meeting and someone says something that irritates you. The forcing response is to snap back, defend yourself, assert your point. The Wu Wei response is to pause, take a breath, and respond only if a response is truly needed. This doesn't mean being passive or letting people walk over you. It means being deliberate. Not every push deserves a pushback. Some things resolve themselves if you let them. That's not weakness, it's strategy. In creative fields, Wu Wei can be a game changer. Writers, designers, filmmakers all report that their best ideas often arrive not when they're forcing them, but when they're relaxed, walking, or even in the shower. This isn't coincidence. The brain's default mode network, which becomes active during rest and daydreaming, is responsible for connecting ideas in novel ways. When you stop forcing creativity, you create space for it to emerge. Wu Wei teaches us to honor that space. In daily routines, the difference is subtle but powerful. You can make breakfast in a rush, cursing the clock, multitasking, burning toast. Or you can slow down, make the same breakfast with attention, presence, even enjoyment. The tasks are the same. The energy is not. One leaves you drained. The other centers you. The world doesn't need more rushed actions, it needs more conscious ones. This philosophy also intersects with sustainability. Forcing nature through over-farming, overbuilding, overconsumption leads to collapse. But when we align with natural systems, when we understand cycles, limits, and balance, we can build societies that thrive over time. Wu Wei on a collective level means creating systems that sustain rather than exploit. It's about working with the planet, not against it. Even healing emotional or physical obeys this logic. You can't force yourself to get over grief. You can't rush recovery from trauma. Healing unfolds in its own time. Wu Wei teaches patience, trust, and the wisdom of surrender. That doesn't mean you do nothing. It means you create the right conditions, rest, support, time, and allow the process to unfold. Wu Wei is hard to define because it resists definition. That's the point. The moment you try to capture it fully, you've already stepped outside it. But you can feel it. You know when you're in it. You know when your life is flowing, when your actions feel natural, when outcomes seem to arise without strain. And you also know when you're out of it, when every step feels heavy, when everything resists you, when no matter how hard you try, things don't work. What Alan Watts helps us see is that Wu Wei isn't some exotic Eastern concept for monks or mystics. It's available here, now, in the choices we make every day. It's a way of being that honors the natural intelligence of the world and of ourselves. It asks us to listen more than speak, to sense more than calculate, to allow more than demand. Wu Wei isn't a trick. It's not a shortcut to get what you want. It's a different relationship to wanting itself. Sometimes, the act of letting go of control opens doors that brute force would never unlock. That's not magic, it's the way life works when we stop getting in our own way. There's a dangerous misconception that continues to follow the principle of Wu Wei, that it promotes laziness or inaction. It's a simplistic and frankly inaccurate reading of what Taoist philosophy, and Alan Watts specifically, is pointing to. Just because someone isn't visibly pushing or visibly struggling doesn't mean they're not deeply engaged. In fact, the kind of engagement Wu Wei encourages might be some of the most attuned and intelligent action a person can take. Not doing is not the same as doing nothing. And Watts is crystal clear on that point. When he discusses the practice of judo, he isn't glorifying passivity. He's highlighting precision. Judo isn't a martial art of brute force. It's an art of leverage, timing, and balance. You don't win in judo by overpowering your opponent. You wait. You watch. You feel the subtle cues of movement. You let the other person extend themselves, get off balance, overreach, and only then, when the moment is right, do you act. You add just enough energy to tip the situation. It's not lack of effort. It's refined effort, efficient effort. It's a dance with gravity, not a wrestle against it. This concept applies to more than martial arts. Life, in many ways, is like a sparring partner. It throws challenges, resistance, movement at you. The mistake most people make is assuming that meeting that force with equal or greater force is the way to win. That's the Western mindset. Push harder, try more, conquer. But what if the better response is to yield strategically, intelligently, and wait for the timing to reveal itself? Alan Watts quotes Shakespeare to drive this home. "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune." That line is not passive. It acknowledges the importance of timing. It's saying, know when to move. Know when the conditions are right. That's Wu Wei. You don't try to make the tide rise. You learn to sail when it does. That line from Shakespeare doesn't glorify drifting aimlessly. It honors the ability to seize the moment when it comes. And you can't do that if you're forcing your way through every situation, blind to the rhythm unfolding around you. Let's use a common, modern example. Job hunting. Most of us have either experienced or know someone who has been in the grind of applying to hundreds of jobs, tweaking resumes late into the night, networking out of desperation. The entire process becomes one of brute force. But then there are those moments when someone pauses, reassesses, takes a break, and suddenly the right opportunity surfaces. It's not magic. It's alignment. It's waiting for the current rather than trying to swim upstream endlessly. That doesn't mean not applying. It means applying wisely, strategically, intuitively. That's the sweet spot Wu Wei speaks to. A similar story plays out in dating. People chase relationships. They push to define, to control, to force intimacy on a timeline. They try to be charming, to win affection, to engineer connection. And yet, most of us know that the best connections happen naturally. They emerge, often when we're not trying, when we're just present, relaxed ourselves. That's not accidental. It's what happens when we stop performing and let things unfold. That's Wu Wei again. It's not absence of intention. It's absence of tension. In the workplace, this becomes particularly clear in creative industries. You'll often hear writers talk about writer's block as a battle. They force themselves to sit down, to write, to grind through. And while discipline has its place, many admit that the best ideas often come when they stop trying so hard. They go for a walk. They take a shower. They step away. And then bam, the idea lands. This isn't laziness. It's recognition that creativity isn't always summoned by willpower. Sometimes it requires space. Alan Watts argues that spontaneity, true spontaneity, can't be manufactured. And yet so many people try. They say, I'm free now. I've realized I'm one with the universe. And then they start behaving in ways they think a free person should act. They reject structure, do the opposite of what society dictates, and claim enlightenment. But if you're acting in response to society, whether in compliance or rebellion, you're still being controlled by it. You're not free. You're reactive. The person who cuts ties with their job, their family, their traditions just to prove a point isn't practicing Wu Wei. They're still forcing, just in a different direction. That's what Watts is getting at. You can't fake effortless living. You can't simulate spontaneity. The moment you try, it's already gone. That's the paradox. Wu Wei must emerge naturally. It's not cultivated. It's not achieved. It's allowed. There's also this idea that waiting is weakness. That if you're not constantly grinding, you're falling behind. That sitting still means being left behind. But what if waiting isn't weakness? What if it's wisdom? Nature operates this way all the time. A seed doesn't sprout the moment it hits soil. It waits. Conditions must be right: moisture, sunlight, temperature. If you dig it up and yell at it to grow, you're not helping. You're killing it. Inaction isn't negligence. Sometimes it's nurturing. Think about moments in your own life when waiting turned out to be the smartest thing you could have done. Maybe you held off on making a big purchase and the price dropped. Maybe you delayed a conversation until emotions settled and the outcome was better. Maybe you sat with uncertainty instead of rushing to a decision, and clarity eventually arrived. These are not passive moments. They're patient ones, strategic, aware. This applies even in crisis. Emergency responders are trained not to rush blindly. They assess. They stay calm. They wait for the right moment to act. Because in chaos, timing is everything. One wrong move can cost lives. The same principle applies across the board. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop, breathe, and wait for the right cue. Not out of fear, out of wisdom. But here's where it gets tricky. Most people are uncomfortable with not knowing. We're trained to fill space with action, to mask uncertainty with busyness. We would rather do the wrong thing than do nothing. It makes us feel in control. But control is often an illusion. Life isn't a machine. It's an ecosystem. You can't force it. You can only participate in it. What's point is subtle, but sharp. Action that emerges from ego wanting to prove, to achieve, to dominate is different from action that arises from clarity. The first is force. The second is flow. And the difference matters. One drains you. The other restores you. This doesn't mean you should sit on your hands and wait for life to happen to you. Wu Wei is not fatalism. It doesn't mean resignation or helplessness. It means attentiveness, readiness. The best analogy might be that of a surfer. You don't control the ocean. You don't create the wave. But you train, you watch, and when the wave comes, you move. You don't sit idle. But you also don't thrash against the sea trying to create your own swell. That would be absurd. In relationships, careers, personal growth, this lesson keeps repeating. Timing is everything. You can't force someone to forgive you. You can't force inspiration. You can't force healing. But you can prepare. You can be present. You can notice the moment when action is needed and respond with grace. There's a deeper level here, too. Wu Wei invites us to examine where our actions come from. Are we doing this because it needs doing? Or because we're anxious, bored, insecure? Are we responding to life? Or reacting to fear? Often, our most frantic actions are just cover for inner discomfort. We move so we don't have to feel. But what if we did feel? What if we waited, felt the discomfort, and let the right action reveal itself? This is radical in today's culture. We're bombarded with messages to move faster, do more, hustle harder. But Watts whispers another truth. Maybe the greatest power is in restraint. Maybe wisdom is knowing when not to act. Maybe mastery is in waiting, watching, and letting the tide carry you instead of thrashing against it. Ultimately, Wu Wei is a challenge to our entire worldview. It asks, what if you trusted life? What if you believed that things unfold in their time? What if you stopped trying to control every outcome and started responding to the present moment instead? That's not laziness. That's a profound act of trust. And in that trust, a different kind of power emerges, one that doesn't need to shout, push, or prove. One that simply is. There's something deeply ironic about trying to be natural. The moment you try, it's already artificial. This is one of the subtleties that Alan Watts addresses in his reflections on Wu Wei and spontaneity. When people hear about ideas like non-doing flow or spiritual freedom, they often latch onto the surface-level aesthetics of those ideas rather than their deeper truths. They try to act spontaneous. They try to behave as if they've awakened. And in doing so, they betray exactly what they're trying to embody. Because true spontaneity has no performance. It arises when there is no audience, no inner critic. No one try to look spontaneous. This phenomenon plays out all the time, especially in spiritual or self-development spaces. People read a few books on enlightenment, attend a weekend meditation retreat, and suddenly adopt the language of awakening. They start saying things like, I've transcended the ego, or I live in a now, or everything is energy. But scratch beneath the surface, and what you find is not freedom, but a new kind of identity, one dressed in spiritual vocabulary, but still deeply attached to being someone special. This is what's often referred to as spiritual bypassing, coined by psychologist John Wellwood. It describes the tendency to use spiritual ideas or practices to avoid dealing with unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or uncomfortable aspects of life. It's the person who says everything happens for a reason to avoid feeling grief. It's the person who insists they've let go of anger, but clearly hasn't. It's the person who talks about inner peace, but can't tolerate discomfort. They're not free, they're repressing. And repression, masked in spiritual language, is still repression. Toxic positivity is another related dynamic. It's the insistence on maintaining a cheerful or optimistic front regardless of what's actually happening. It tells people to just think positive, look on the bright side, or vibrate higher, even in the face of genuine suffering. On the surface, it seems well-intentioned, but underneath, it's a denial of reality. It's another form of control, a way of rejecting discomfort and pretending everything's fine when it isn't. And that's the opposite of Wu Wei. Wu Wei is about flowing with what is, not denying it. It's about being with the moment as it is, not how you wish it would be. True spontaneity includes the capacity to feel grief, to be confused, to not know. It allows the full spectrum of human experience. The fake version cherry picks only what looks good and performs it. You can often see this dynamic in people who suddenly adopt a spiritual persona. Maybe they start wearing all white clothes, speaking in soft tones, avoiding strong emotions, or claiming to be above worldly concerns. And yet, when challenged, when confronted with something they can't control, you often see irritation, defensiveness, or a subtle form of superiority. That's the giveaway. The persona is fragile. It's reactive, and that's how you know it's not real. There's a story I once heard that captures this perfectly. It's about a man named Jonah, who in his mid-30s went through what he called a spiritual awakening. He had just come out of a messy divorce, was burned out at work, and had been dabbling in meditation for a few months. One night, during a silent retreat, he experienced what he described as ego death, a moment where he felt a complete sense of unity with all things. Afterward, he was convinced that he had reached enlightenment. He quit his job, changed his name to Shanti, and started posting long monologues on Instagram about surrender and cosmic flow. On the surface, it looked like he had transformed, but beneath it, he was still escaping. He hadn't dealt with the pain of the divorce. He hadn't grieved. He hadn't processed the shame of feeling like a failure. Instead, he bypassed all of that and jumped into a spiritual identity. It gave him a sense of superiority, of having figured it out. But that illusion began to crack when he started relationships again. He couldn't tolerate emotional intimacy. Anytime a partner expressed pain or doubt, he accused them of being too attached or not being in the flow. He couldn't handle disagreement. He weaponized spiritual concepts to avoid vulnerability. Eventually, things fell apart. A friend called him out, not harshly, but honestly. They pointed out that his presence didn't feel peaceful. It felt performative. That his spiritual advice often came across as judgment. And Jonah broke down. For the first time, he admitted he was scared. He had no idea who he really was without the identity. The awakening hadn't failed him, it just hadn't been integrated. And that's the danger of fake spontaneity. It creates the illusion of growth while keeping us stuck. Watts warns us about this kind of delusion. He says that people who try to be Wu Wei fail precisely because they're trying. They're still efforting. They're still controlled by the same societal patterns, they've just flipped them. Instead of following the rules, they now do the opposite of the rules. But that's still reacting to the rules. It's not freedom. It's rebellion disguised as freedom. And rebellion, while sometimes necessary, is still rooted in resistance. True spontaneity arises when we're no longer trying to be anything at all, when we're not managing impressions, when we're not curating an identity, when we've stopped comparing ourselves to what we think awakened people are supposed to look like. It's deeply ordinary, not glamorous, not dramatic. In fact, most truly awakened people probably wouldn't claim to be awakened, because the moment you fixate on the idea of being awakened, you've stepped out of presence and into ego. This is especially tricky in the age of social media. Platforms reward performance. People get likes for appearing calm, enlightened, aesthetically minimalist. There's a whole industry built on spiritual influencers who sell an image of peace, clarity, and bliss. But often, they're selling aesthetics, not authenticity. They're caught in the trap of fake spontaneity, acting like they've arrived while still desperately trying to be seen. And many of their followers end up feeling inadequate because no matter how much they meditate or journal or say affirmations, they still feel human. Flawed, messy, which is to say real. One of the most painful parts of fake spontaneity is the internal pressure it creates. You feel like you should be free by now, that you should have transcended suffering, that you're doing something wrong if you still get triggered, still feel anxious, still have bad days. But this is a misunderstanding of what awakening really means. It doesn't mean perfection. It means presence. It means honesty. It means including the whole of yourself, not editing out the parts that don't fit your image. Watts invites us to drop the performance, not just externally, but internally, to stop trying to be anything other than what we are right now. And that's terrifying because it means facing parts of ourselves we'd rather hide. But it's also liberating, because once we stop trying to look awake, we can actually begin to wake up, not in some mystical, cosmic sense, but in a human, grounded, moment-by-moment way. The path of real spontaneity is humble. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval. It moves quietly, organically. It shows up in small choices, in telling the truth when lying would be easier, in resting when everyone says you should push, in crying when you're told to smile. It's honest. That's what makes it powerful. And yes, it's messy. There's no formula. You can't fake your way into it. You can't skip the work of inner honesty. You can't fast-track your way to presence. And that's why fake spontaneity is so tempting. It promises all the rewards without any of the discomfort. But the cost is high. You lose contact with reality. You lose yourself in a role. So what's the antidote? Slowing down, getting curious, asking yourself hard questions, being willing to not know, being willing to be seen in your rawness, letting go of the need to be impressive, trusting that the you that emerges when you stop performing is enough. Watts isn't telling us to be spontaneous. He's telling us to stop trying, to stop interfering, to let the stream flow without jumping in and trying to direct it. Because the truth is, the flow is already happening. You're already in it. The only thing that gets in the way is your need to control how it looks. The moment you let go of that, spontaneity arises not as an achievement, but as a natural expression of who you already are. Children have a kind of magic that most adults forget, not in the whimsical fairy tale sense, but in the way they experience the world. Raw, immediate, unfiltered. They don't require explanations for everything. They can stare at a leaf for 5 minutes, spin in circles until they collapse in laughter, or ask strange questions about the universe without worrying whether those questions make sense. To them, everything is mysterious, and that's not a problem, it's a source of joy. Alan Watts points directly to this in his reflections on Wu Wei. He invites us to return to that childlike state, not out of immaturity, but out of wisdom. Because children embody something adults have lost, the ability to be with the weirdness of existence without needing to tame it. As Watts says, you have to become again as a child to see that. To see what? The fundamental oddness of reality. The strange fact that we're even here at all. That we're breathing, blinking, feeling, existing on a rock floating in space. Children don't try to rationalize that away. They lean into it. They ask questions that poke holes in our adult assumptions. Where does space end? What's outside the sky? What did God do before the beginning? These aren't naive questions. They're bold. They're honest. And most adults, when faced with them, get uncomfortable. We laugh them off or change the subject. Not because the questions are silly, but because they force us to admit we don't know. This is exactly where Wu Wei lives. In the willingness to admit we don't know. In the space where curiosity replaces control. Adults often believe that being in control is the same as being safe. We crave certainty. We want answers, labels, categories. But the moment we cling to that, we lose touch with life as it is. We trade wonder for explanation. We substitute facts for awe. And in doing so, we lose the kind of spontaneity that makes life vivid. Watts touches on this when he talks about space. He says, heaven is now, because the earth is a spaceship and heaven is space. This flips our usual understanding upside down. Heaven isn't some far-off afterlife. It's here, now. It's the background to everything we experience. And yet, we don't see it not because it's hidden, but because it's too obvious. It's the silence between sounds, the stillness behind movement, the emptiness that allows form to appear. Children notice this. Adults overlook it. Take a child on a walk, and they'll stop every few feet. A bug, a crack in the sidewalk, a puddle, all of it demands attention. They're not trying to get somewhere. They're fully in the journey. The adult, on the other hand, is always trying to get to the destination. We tug their hand, hurry them along, keep our eyes on the watch. We live for what's next. They live for what's now. That difference is at the heart of Wu Wei. It's not about regression into helplessness. It's about reclaiming our capacity for presence. A child doesn't worry about whether they're doing it right. They don't manage their identity. They don't self-correct every impulse. They act, and in that action is freedom. That doesn't mean they're always wise or careful, but it does mean they haven't yet been trained to second-guess their every move. Of course, as adults, we can't live exactly like children. We have responsibilities. We've seen pain, disappointment, complexity. But what isn't asking us to forget all that? He's asking us to reawaken something that never truly died, the part of us that still feels wonder, still sees mystery, still finds delight in the unexplainable. The part that can laugh without a reason and cry without shame. The part that knows space isn't empty, it's sacred. In meditation, this returns. The first time I sat on a cushion and tried to let go, I failed miserably. My mind raced. I kept checking how long I'd been sitting. I evaluated my posture, my breath, my inner commentary. But then something happened. I stopped trying. I didn't force silence. I just noticed. I let the noise be there. And within that, a different kind of quiet emerged. Not one that I created, but one that was always there beneath the effort. It reminded me of being a child lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling fan, feeling the air move without needing to do anything. That was meditation before I even knew the word. And that's what means by returning to the child. Not through regression, but through release. The release of control, of needing to have all the answers, of trying to make life make sense. He talks about space not just as physical emptiness, but as the very ground of being. In Eastern philosophy, this is sometimes called the void, but not in a nihilistic sense. It's not nothingness in the way we usually fear. It's potential. It's possibility. It's what allows everything else to exist. Without space, there's no form. Without silence, there's no music. Without pause, there's no rhythm. And yet, most of us are terrified of space. We fill every gap with noise, literal and metaphorical. We check our phones in line. We scroll while watching TV. We multitask not because we have to, but because we've forgotten how to just be. Stillness feels like failure. Emptiness feels like lack. But what if space isn't empty? What if it's full of everything we've been looking for? Children seem to know this. They'll sit in a room and talk to themselves, build imaginary worlds, explore with no purpose. They don't need an audience. They don't need validation. They're just there. And ironically, that's what every adult trying to be present is chasing. We read books about mindfulness, take courses on embodiment, listen to guided meditations, all in hopes of accessing what a 4-year-old does naturally. This isn't to shame our adult selves. We've learned to survive in a world that often rewards speed, control, and certainty, but the cost is high. We lose touch with the ground beneath our feet. We forget that we are not separate from nature, but expressions of it. Wu Wei is a return to that knowing. It's the inner exhale, the surrender not of effort, but of excess effort, of grasping, of resistance. When Watts says, you have to check your ideas and opinions at the door, he's not calling for ignorance. He's inviting us into a deeper form of intelligence, one that listens before speaking, one that notices before naming, one that trusts the rhythm of things without needing to dominate it. Try this sometime. Sit in silence and let your thoughts be like weather, moving, shifting, not something you need to fix. Or take a walk without a destination. Let your body move without planning every step. Or better yet, spend time with a child. Let them lead. See the world through their eyes. You'll notice how much beauty hides in plain sight. The truth is, most of us are not far from that childlike awareness. It's not gone, it's buried. Under layers of performance, pressure, productivity. Wu Wei asks us to dig it out not by trying harder, but by loosening our grip, by remembering that the world is weird, and that's okay. In fact, that's wonderful. One of the most powerful experiences I've had with this was during a silent retreat. On the third day, after the initial discomfort wore off, I began to notice strange things. The way sunlight fell through the leaves, the tiny movements of insects, the sound of my own breath, and then something unexpected. I laughed, not because something was funny, but because I realized how absurdly beautiful it all was. How I had been walking past miracles every day without seeing them. That laughter, that lightness, that was Wu Wei. And it wasn't something I could hold on to. The moment I tried to recreate it, it slipped away. That's the paradox. You can't aim for it. You can only allow it. Just like a child doesn't aim to be spontaneous, they simply are. In the end, returning to the child is about trust. Trusting that life doesn't always need your interference. That sometimes, the best thing you can do is be still. Watch, wonder, laugh, cry, feel. That's not regression. That's evolution. That's remembering the parts of you that knew how to dance before you learned the rules. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Alan Watts was really getting at. That heaven is not some future reward. It's not earned through effort. It's remembered in stillness, in space, in the parts of you that never forgot how strange and sacred it all is. Imagine waking up tomorrow and deciding, just for one day, not to force anything. You still go to work. You still run errands. You still meet people. But your posture toward all of it changes. You no longer push yourself to act out of obligation, anxiety, or fear of falling behind. You move through your day not lazily, but lightly. You listen to the moment. You act when it feels right. You rest when you need to. You trust the current of things to guide you. That's the essence of Wu Wei. And it's not a theory, it's something you can try. Start by setting an intention in the morning. Today, I will let go of forcing. That doesn't mean lying in bed all day or ignoring responsibilities. It means choosing presence over pressure. It means observing yourself in each moment and asking, am I acting because it's aligned or because I feel I have to? This one question can change everything. So you begin. The alarm rings. Instead of jumping up in a panic, you pause. You check in. You notice how your body feels. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're rested. You stretch. You breathe. You don't rush. You move slowly to the kitchen. You make coffee, not to power through the morning, but to savor the ritual. Already, the tone of your day is different. You're not sprinting. You're arriving. You sit down to check email. Normally, this would trigger a flood of tension, urgency, stress. But today, you observe. You answer only the messages that truly need attention. You let others wait, not out of carelessness, but from clarity. You realize how often you've been a servant to false urgency. You begin to discern the difference between noise and signal. Then you go outside. The city is loud. People are rushing. Cars honk. But you're not pulled into it. You walk at your own pace. You notice the breeze, the way the sunlight hits the pavement, the quietness underneath the chaos. It's all still happening, but your relationship to it has changed. You're not resisting. You're not chasing. You're simply moving through. At work, you approach tasks with the same mindset. There are things that must be done. Yes, but even within that, you can choose how you engage. You find that when you stop trying to control every outcome, your creativity opens up. Ideas come more freely. You're not fighting the clock. You're collaborating with the moment. This happened to a friend of mine, Aaron, who's a graphic designer. He tried this exact experiment for a day. He said, I told myself I wouldn't force any design. If nothing came, I'd accept that. And in the morning, nothing did come. So he walked away. He sat in the park. He doodled with no goal. And by afternoon, he was flooded with ideas. Not because he pushed, but because he gave space. What he produced that day was some of his best work, not because he tried harder, but because he stopped trying to try. Back to your own day. Lunch comes. Normally you'd eat quickly, maybe while staring at your phone, barely tasting anything. But today you eat slowly. You chew. You notice flavor. You breathe between bites. It sounds trivial, but it's profound. You begin to realize how rarely you're present for the small things. Someone calls you unexpectedly. Usually, this might annoy you. You have plans, a schedule. But today, you're open. You answer. You listen. The conversation turns meaningful. They share something vulnerable. You're moved. And you think, if I had been in my usual mode, I would have missed this. Wu Wei isn't just about efficiency. It's about availability to life, to others, to the unexpected. Later, a problem arises. A decision must be made. You feel the old reflex kick in the need to solve it immediately to control the outcome. But you pause. You breathe. You ask yourself, what's actually needed here? And you realize you don't have to act yet. You can wait. So you do. An hour later, new information arrives. The solution becomes obvious. You smile. You didn't force. And it worked. Throughout the day, you begin to notice patterns. How often you say yes out of guilt. How often you rush when no one's making you. How often you assume things must be hard. And slowly, those assumptions unravel. You start to trust ease, not as avoidance, but as intelligence. Wu Wei doesn't mean absence of discipline. It means applying discipline where it matters and letting go where it doesn't. You also notice your nervous system calming. The background buzz of anxiety starts to soften. You're more grounded. Your thoughts are clearer. It's not that the world has changed, it's that you're no longer bracing against it. You're aligned. This is what happened to Rachel, a product manager I worked with. She told me, when I started living with less push, I became more effective, not less. I stopped micromanaging. I listened more. My team responded better. Meetings felt lighter. And I had more energy at the end of the day. That's the paradox. Less effort can lead to better outcomes if the effort you remove is the kind that's misaligned. Of course, not everything goes smoothly. There are moments when you forget. You slip into old habits. You stress about a deadline, snap at a coworker, scroll Instagram mindlessly. But even then, you catch it. You laugh. You return. That's part of it. Wu Wei isn't perfection. It's awareness. It's the ongoing choice to come back to center. By evening, you feel different. Not necessarily euphoric, but settled. Whole. You haven't accomplished more in terms of quantity, but the quality of your day is unmistakably richer. You were present. You were honest. You acted only when it felt true. And that has a cumulative effect. You notice this even in the smallest things. Brushing your teeth, washing dishes, saying goodnight. All of it becomes part of the same field of attention. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is resisted. There's a quiet joy that seeps in not because everything was pleasant, but because nothing was forced. You start to wonder, what if I lived like this more often? Not always, not perfectly, but more often. What would change? What would I let go of? What would I invite in? You realize that most of your suffering comes not from what's happening, but from your posture toward it. Wu Wei isn't about changing life. It's about changing your orientation to life. And that's within your power. Some people might say this isn't realistic. That modern life demands effort, hustle, pushing. And yes, responsibilities exist. Deadlines exist. Challenges exist. But the point is not to withdraw from effort, it's to direct it skillfully. To act when it's time and rest when it's not. To trust timing, trust intuition, trust the intelligence of your own system. There's a reason athletes, artists, and innovators speak about being in the zone. That zone isn't created by force. It's accessed by flow, by presence, by trust. And that's not a luxury, it's a skill. A skill you can practice, one day at a time. Another example is Ben, a software engineer who used to live in a constant state of pressure. Always multitasking, always behind. He tried this experiment for a weekend. No plans, no optimization, just listening to his own impulses. He ended up going for a hike, journaling, cooking slowly. On Monday, he felt more productive than he had in weeks. It's like my brain defragment, he said. I didn't realize how much tension I was carrying until I let it go. This isn't about becoming unproductive. It's about becoming sustainably productive, creative, resilient, human. We're not machines. We're organisms. And organisms flourish in balance, not in perpetual grind. If you do this experiment, even for one day, you'll begin to see where your life has been driven by force. You'll see the subtle ways you resist what is, the ways you override your own wisdom. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. A new kind of intelligence starts to emerge. Not intellectual, but embodied. You begin to trust pauses. You begin to enjoy slowness. You begin to act from a deeper place. It's not always easy. There will be days where everything in you wants to control, fix, manipulate. That's normal. But now you have another option. You know what it feels like to not force. And sometimes, just remembering that is enough to change the moment. Wu Wei isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the right thing at the right time in the right way with no extra. It's elegance. It's grace. It's a way of living that honors effort but doesn't worship it. That respects the pace of nature, the rhythm of the body, the intelligence of the moment. Try it. For one day. Don't force. Don't fake. Don't rush. Let yourself be guided, not driven. And see what happens. You might be surprised. Not by what you get done, but by how you feel. Clearer, calmer, more alive, and maybe, just maybe, more yourself than you've been in a long time. There's something counterintuitive but deeply liberating about the realization that the less you try to control life, the more powerfully you move through it. This is not the power of dominance or assertion. It's the power of presence, the kind that doesn't bend things to its will, but works with the flow of reality to bring about outcomes with elegance and clarity. This is the core of Wu Wei. Alan Watts wasn't offering some vague spiritual abstraction when he said, Wu Wei is the art of sailing, not rowing. He was articulating one of the most profound and practical insights into how human beings can live with more intelligence, grace, and inner freedom. Sailing, by nature, requires awareness of the wind, the current, the weather, and the structure of your boat. You don't command the wind, you cooperate with it. You harness what's already there. Rowing, on the other hand, is all about brute strength. You're fighting against resistance, pushing forward through force, often exhausting yourself in the process. Both might get you across the water, but one does so with a rhythm aligned to nature, the other with relentless effort. Watts' point is that the best outcomes in life often come from the former. The tendency to row through life is everywhere. You see it in the way people cling to schedules so tightly that they lose all sense of flexibility. You see it in parents who micromanage every aspect of their child's development. You see it in workers who can't stop checking their email, even when their inbox is empty. You see it in students who burn themselves out not out of love for learning, but out of fear of failure. These are all forms of forcing of rowing when the wind is already there, waiting to carry you if only you would raise your sail. And yet, this form of control is so normalized that we hardly notice it. We equate effort with virtue, stress with commitment, exhaustion with meaning. If someone isn't grinding, we assume they're not trying hard enough. But this is a deeply limited way to understand human potential. The best musicians don't force their notes. The best athletes don't clinch their way to victory. The best leaders don't overmanage their teams. What they all share is a kind of relaxed precision, being totally engaged but without tension. That's what real control looks like. Not the desperate need to shape every moment, but the ability to respond to it wisely. When you stop trying to control everything, you create space for things to unfold. You stop reacting and you start responding. You stop bracing against life and you begin to move with it. Ironically, that's when your influence increases. Because you're no longer fighting reality, you're working with it. You become like water, adaptive, strong, and impossible to pin down. People often confuse Wu Wei with giving up, but they're missing the nuance. Giving up implies resignation. Wu Wei implies alignment. You still act. You still make decisions. You still move through the world. But your actions come from a deeper place, not from fear or pressure, but from a calm knowing. You begin to trust that there's a rhythm to things, that sometimes the wisest move is to wait, that the right action at the right moment is far more powerful than constant effort. This is visible in all kinds of everyday scenarios. Think about driving. You can aggressively tailgate the car in front of you, constantly switch lanes, honk, and curse traffic, or you can accept that you're moving at the pace available to you and use the time to breathe, listen to music, think, or simply observe. In one version, you arrive stressed. In the other, you arrive centered. The destination is the same. The journey is radically different. Wu Wei doesn't change the facts. It changes the experience. The same holds true for relationships. Trying to control how others see you, love you, treat you, that's rowing. It creates anxiety, miscommunication, resentment. But when you allow people to be who they are, and you respond with honesty instead of manipulation, connection deepens. That's sailing. You're not imposing a script. You're dancing with what's present. The conversation becomes more alive. The relationship becomes more resilient. Even in decision-making, Wu Wei offers a profound insight. The mind likes certainty. It wants to decide now. But often, the wisest decisions don't come from force, they emerge over time. You sleep on it. You take a walk. You stop thinking. And then the answer arrives, not because you chased it, but because you made space for it. This isn't passivity. It's wisdom. The conscious choice to trust the process over the panic. There's a story of a software engineer named Marcus who was leading a high-stakes project. The team hit a wall. The architecture wasn't working, deadlines were looming, and pressure was mounting. The instinct was to double down, more meetings, longer hours, more directives. But Marcus paused. He told the team to take a day off. Go for a walk. Do something unrelated. People were skeptical. But when they came back, someone saw the problem from a new angle. A simple shift in data structure solved it. Weeks of tension unraveled in 1 hour of clear insight. That's Wu Wei. Not absence of action, but the refusal to act until the time is right. What invites us to consider what our lives would look like if we stopped living in a state of constant interference. Most of us live like gardeners who keep digging up the roots to check if the plant is growing. We don't trust the process. We panic. We interfere. We try to optimize every moment. But some things need time. Some things need space. Wu Wei teaches us to create that space not by being lazy, but by being wise. It also asks us to be deeply honest about where our actions come from. Are we acting from fear or from freedom? Are we making choices out of habit or awareness? Are we chasing something because we want it or because we think we should? Wu Wei is not just about what you do. It's about why you do it. And once you start asking those questions, life begins to shift. That's what happened to a friend of mine, Nina. She was an executive at a fast-growing startup, constantly overwhelmed, always on. She hit burnout. Her therapist introduced her to the idea of Wu Wei not as a spiritual practice, but as a way to navigate work differently. She started small. 1 meeting a day with no agenda. 1 morning a week with no phone. 1 decision a week made by intuition instead of analysis. Over months, her work got better. Her team performed better. And she found something she thought she had lost joy. Not because she tried harder, but because she stopped trying to force what couldn't be forced. This is the heart of the matter. Life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own rhythm. When we stop clinging, pushing, and micromanaging, we start to hear it. And when we hear it, we can move with it. Like a surfer catching a wave, like a musician improvising a solo, like a tree bending in the wind. Not passive, not inactive, but deeply, wisely aligned. So what's the invitation? Try it. Not forever. Not perfectly. Just for 1 day. 1 day of not forcing. 1 day of noticing when you're acting from fear, from pressure, from performance, and choosing something softer. 1 day of letting yourself breathe. Of letting life breathe through you. Wake up and let your body set the pace. Eat when you're hungry. Not just when the clock says so. Speak when you have something true to say. Rest when you're tired, even if it's just a moment. Act when clarity arises. Step back when confusion dominates. Trust that space is not wasted time. Trust that ease is not laziness. Trust that you, too, are part of the natural world, and the natural world does not force. If you try it, you'll likely feel resistance. That's normal. You're breaking a lifelong habit of control. You'll feel the urge to push, to explain, to justify. Let it come. Let it pass. That, too, is part of the practice. Wu Wei doesn't mean you won't feel tension. It means you stop adding to it unnecessarily. You learn to witness it, to hold it, to let it move through. By the end of the day, you may not have accomplished more, but you will have lived differently. And that difference matters, because over time, it changes everything. It's not just about feeling better. It's about being more present, more honest, more available to the truth of the moment. It's about becoming someone who doesn't force, and in doing so, becomes unshakable. That's the lesson. Not that effort is wrong, but that misdirected effort born from fear, compulsion, or conditioning is wasted. When you act from alignment, from trust, from clarity, your actions carry power. They ripple outward. They create change. Not because you tried harder, but because you move with the wind. So remember the words of Alan Watts. Wu Wei is the art of sailing, not rowing. And remember that the sea is already moving. The wind is already blowing. Your job is not to conquer it, but to listen, adjust your sail, and let yourself be carried not away from life, but deeper into it. So here we are, at the end of a journey that ironically isn't about chasing something new, but about remembering something ancient. You started this video rowing. Maybe not literally, but internally, mentally, emotionally, pushing, grinding, trying, and maybe, just maybe, now you're seeing what it means to raise the sail instead. What we explore today, Wu Wei, is not a trick, a hack, or some abstract spiritual fluff. It's a deep shift in posture, a new relationship with life itself. It's a way of seeing effort not as the goal, but as the means, of understanding that power doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes, real strength whispers. Alan Watts didn't say don't act. He said don't force. Let that land. You can still build, create, lead, speak, grow, but from a place of inner quiet, inner timing, aligned effort. And when you do that, when your actions emerge from clarity instead of compulsion, you begin to feel what it really means to live. That's when decisions become obvious, conversations become real, work becomes meaningful, and relationships begin to breathe. It's easy to hear something like Wu Wei and think, yeah, that's beautiful, but I have bills to pay, deadlines to meet, kids to feed. Yes, life is real. The pressure is real. But here's the truth. You can do all of that and still not force. You can show up with presence. You can do hard things with ease in your breath and softness in your chest. You can meet challenge with grace instead of rigidity. You can stop rowing and start listening to the wind. And maybe tomorrow, when the pressure kicks in, when the stress rises, when your mind says, we have to push, you'll remember this video. You'll remember what it feels like to pause, to breathe, to act only when it's time. Maybe you'll close your laptop 10 minutes earlier and go outside. Maybe you'll sit still for a moment longer before you speak. Maybe you'll let that moment of confusion be a place of rest, not a threat. That's Wu Wei. You're not abandoning life. You're finally entering it. And if you're still unsure, still skeptical, then let this be your invitation. Try it, just for one day of not forcing anything, one day of moving only when it feels right, one day of saying no when your body says no, one day of trusting that life knows more than your calendar. And if even that feels too much, try 1 hour. See how you feel, see how the world responds, and then come back to this video. Tell me what you noticed, because Wu Wei isn't something you believe, and it's something you live. And now, you know how to begin. If this video stirred something in you, if it slowed you down, opened your mind, or made you breathe a little deeper, then please like the video to help more people find it. Subscribe if you haven't, yet we go deep here. No fluff, no shortcuts. Just timeless wisdom for real life. And if you want to support this channel directly and say thank you, click the super thank button right below. Even a small donation goes a long way and helps me keep making content like this with care and attention. Share this video with someone who's rowing too hard today, someone who needs to hear. You don't have to force it. Let them know there's another way, a better way, the way of Wu Wei. Until next time, take care of yourself. And don't forget to let go.